Okay, I want to give kind of a strategy of how to talk about visual work. And hopefully you can just use this as a simple example of an approach to talk about your work. So it's kind of a three-stage deal. Stage one, tell us a little bit about the project. Um, and in that case, what I'll give you, like I said, I'll give you the example, but um, what I mean is not like what the teacher assigned, but in some cases it may be imaginary or something that you have to make up. But tell me about the client. Tell me about what the client is wanting to do or what you're designing. Um, so that's one. Tell us about the project. Step two, give three characteristics that are important to the client. Um, and then step three, tie your design decisions to those three concepts. So those three characteristics. So step one tells about the project. Step two, three characteristics that are important to the client. And step three, your design decisions tied to those three characteristics. So I have this example. This is some student work from several years ago, a magazine project. And so I am going to first talk about the magazine, talk about the three characteristics important to the client, and then tie design decisions to those characteristics. If you like the idea of threes, sometimes it's nice to tie three design characteristics to each of the three concepts. So, first about the magazine. So, like I said, this is made up, so I'm just going to kind of make up some stuff about this magazine based on how it looks. So the client tell me this is a very serious-minded magazine. It's about contemporary philosophy and contemporary culture. Um, the writing is very serious-minded. They have really high-quality writers working on this, so the writing is very important. So the three characteristics they wanted me to push were number one, seriousness. This idea of it being a serious magazine, that it needs to feel serious, that it's not really playful. And so seriousness was one of the first things they wanted it to embody. Number two, literary. It's kind of a weird word, but by literary they meant that it's like literature. Again, very serious writing, and so they like the idea of tying it to kind of the history of literature. And wanting some nods towards the idea of the writing being important in literature. So literary was the second one, and the third one is cutting edge. And so it's kind of different than the others, but they did want people to understand that this is a modern, cutting edge magazine. Um, it's new writing and it's about new ideas. So cutting edge was the third one. So serious, literary, and cutting edge are kind of the three core ideas that I want to tie my design decisions to. So first, on the serious side, um, so the first thing I want to mention is the grid structure. It's this very kind of clear, clean grid structure, simple three column. If you click through the three spreads, you can see the structure. It's not confusing. Um, it's not playful. It's this very clear grid structure. The second thing is the negative space. There's lots of kind of white space and open space around it. You can see that, it's particularly on spread number two, this kind of openness. Um, and these large margins around as well. So kind of the large center margin here on the third spread. And so it can feel that white space plays a part in it, negative space plays a part in it. And lastly, on the serious side, the typography, specifically this large this large serif font used for the headers. And so it's this kind of no nonsense, old style serif font, not very, not very playful, just kind of straightforward and serious. And so using that old style serif font as kind of a main font in the piece is kind of this serious, has this kind of serious quality. So the second characteristic, literary. I had to go back and look at a lot of old literature books, whether it's poetry books or kind of books by famous writers. Um, and one thing you'll notice is a lot of kind of classical centered design. So you can see all this text being centered here. I center some text in different places. A lot of this kind of the technology here, the header here, the page numbers being centered. There is kind of this nod towards centering things that I think has this kind of classic literary quality. This use of all caps and lowercase italic, and looking at some of the old literature books, they would use this technique from time to time. Lowercase italic next to this all caps, both in serif form and then loose leading. And so the mixture of the lowercase with the uppercase in instances like this was kind of a nod towards literature. In the body copy, the really open, loose leading. Kind of again kind of a nod towards poetry, loosening up that leading a bit, letting kind of the white space be there, and kind of letting the white space kind of dominate. Then lastly, this isn't so much kind of literature, but kind of a nod towards writing and editing. When I thought about kind of writing and editing, I thought of like highlighting things, and so using this big yellow kind of highlighter, I thought was kind of an interesting way to nod just towards writing. So highlighting this as if you had a big highlighter and just highlighted that section or this header, and using that bright yellow color, that it kind of nods towards highlighting things. So that's literary. Then the last thing, cutting edge. One composition, this first composition, I don't think has kind of a super strong kind of cutting edge modern quality. But the other two compositions, the way I tried to balance these compositions, I felt like was more contemporary and modern. Lots of white space here. They're balanced in more of a dynamic balance than a symmetrical balance, right? They're not symmetrical. These two sides don't match each other, but the page still balances like this kind of heavy image over here, surrounded by white space, and then balanced on this side by a lot of text. This page is similar in that this far left-hand side is this heavy image, but all of this text and these elements over here kind of help to balance that out. But again, it's not symmetrical balance, it's kind of this dynamic, almost like modern paintings. Mondrian or some modern artists might balance their paintings in this kind of dynamic balance, contemporary artists, versus a more classical composition. Another thing kind of tied to that cutting edge is this use. Actually, I think of this highlighter, like these kind of big blocks just highlighting at these angles has to me like this contemporary feel. It feels kind of irreverent, which contrasts with the literature certainly, but it's these kind of these big blocks kind of feel bright blocks, and the color, this kind of bright, saturated yellow, I think has this contemporary feels a little in your face, So that was kind of an effort to be cutting edge. And then lastly, font choice. I use this condensed sans serif for all of the subheads. So using a sans serif, a condensed sans serif, as kind of a prominent secondary font in addition to the serif font, as kind of bringing in a modern quality. But then also using a sans serif body copy. Typically here you'd see a serif font for the body copy, but using a sans serif font for the body copy I think is kind of a nod towards a cutting edge modern quality. And so those are kind of the main reasons behind my design choices. Okay, so I hope this helped explain how you might talk through your work. Choose 3 core characteristics and then tie your design decisions to those 3 characteristics. All right, hope it's a good example. Thank you.